We're going to be recording this webinar, and the recording will be available on the PA Adult Ed Resources website and also on the PA Adult Ed Resources YouTube page. So if after today you want to revisit any of the topics we discussed or share it with any of your colleagues or tutors that you work with, please feel free to visit the website and check that out. My name is Jonathan Edwards. I am a consultant with the Professional Learning Opportunities Project, and I am joined today by Megan Kennedy and Denise Weigert from Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit 5, and they're both instructors. And we are going to be focusing today on strategies for teaching vocabulary. Denise, Megan, and I, for the last few years, have been working with a reading program called Student Achievement in Reading, or the acronym STAR, because of course in adult ed, we need to have an acronym for pretty much everything that we use. And STAR is an evidence-based approach to teaching reading. And through working with that and working with a bunch of learners with this STAR reading program, we found that just how impactful vocabulary instruction is with the learners that we've been working with. And so today we wanted to share some of the strategies that we've learned and have used with students and have found successful. So hopefully there's some information in today's webinar that will be useful for you and for the learners that you're working with. So our agenda for today, after this introduction, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the rationale behind why we teach vocabulary to adult learners. And then I'm going to pass it over to Denise, who's going to talk about some strategies for introducing new vocabulary to learners and kind of helping to gauge some of their prior knowledge about the words that you're focusing on. Then Megan's going to introduce at least one instructional strategy. We have 4 ready to go, but it's going to depend on time. We only have an hour. So if we don't get to all 4, we're going to share these slides with you so that you can at least look at what we have and maybe utilize some of those resources. We also have a bunch of links to resources at the end that we'll share with you. Yeah, and I guess that's the last step then, is to talk about some of the resources and next steps. Our objectives are for today, what we'd like by the end of today's webinar, we're hoping that you'll be able to describe some of the reasons why we include specific vocabulary instruction when we're teaching adult learners. And also you'll be able to use one or more of the instructional strategies for helping to build academic vocabulary with your learners. As I mentioned, we will share these slides with you so that you'll have access to these resources and the recording will be available. So before we kind of get into this, we want to do a real short activity just to get us thinking about vocabulary. So I'm going to put a sentence up on the screen here and in just a second, and I want you to read the sentence, and then I'm just going to open it up if anyone wants to unmute and tell us what they think the sentence means. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. So go ahead and read that, and once you've read it, please feel free to unmute and tell us the meaning of that sentence.
Well, we don't know if it's positive or negative, but that there's circumstances that change the job of this person.
Okay. So we're getting a little bit of information there. We know it has to do with someone's job, and that there's some circumstances that impact that. Can anyone give us some more specific information on what the meaning of this sentence is? All right, so first I do want to point out one thing, which is that there are 4 very complex words in this sentence, and they are all real words with real meanings. As an example, that first word, the first difficult one, psephology, is actually has to do with political science, and it refers to someone who, I don't know, like researches elections and balloting and things like that. So these are all real words, and you can go ahead and look them up if you'd like. But the point of this was to think about when our students encounter words and sentences that they don't understand. So let me ask you another question. Why do you think it was difficult to explain the meaning of this sentence?
Those vocabulary words are highly unfamiliar to all of us, even though we're well educated. We don't know those.
Thanks, Lisa. So we have, and not only one individual word, but there are 4 words particularly that are very complex, difficult words that most people are not familiar with the meanings of, right? So a lot of times when we're talking, I don't want to assume anyone's doing this, but sometimes I've heard teachers say, well, students should use context clues to figure out the meaning, right? Now, context clues might work if there is maybe one word that you don't know the meaning of, but you know the meanings of all the other words in the sentence. And then you can use that information to try to figure out the meaning of that one word. But what we find is when a learner encounters a text where there are multiple words that they don't know, it's incredibly difficult for them to use context clues and to figure out the meanings of those unknown words using other information, because they don't even know what the other information means. And so this is one of the reasons why we really want to focus on vocabulary instruction, and particularly what we call academic vocabulary, so that when students encounter texts and they have to read them and find meaning from them to be able to pass a test like the GED, or to be successful in their work environment, that they have that background knowledge of vocabulary, that they're able to even if it's a word they don't know, maybe start to try to figure it out. And so we're going to talk about a little bit more about why that is, and then some of the strategies today to address that. So there are four main components when it comes to learning how to read. And today we're going to focus on vocabulary, which we feel is one of the most critical components. But as you see on the screen here, the four components are alphabetics, which is a learner's ability to decode printed text. So when they see a word and they might not be familiar with that word, that using their understanding of phonics, that they're able to decode and be able to at least pronounce that word. The second one is fluency, which is a learner's ability to read aloud with what we call accuracy and rate, and good rate and prosody. Rate is, of course, the pace at which they read. We don't want readers reading too fast, because then they won't probably understand what they're saying, or too slow, but at a moderate pace. And prosody is a term that means the way they express when they're reading, their rhythm, their pausing at punctuation, things like that. Of course, vocabulary, which is a learner's knowledge of word meanings. And then finally, comprehension, which is the learner's ability to understand what they have read. So in our work, Megan, Denise, and I, our work with this STAR reading program that we've been working with, we focus on intermediate level readers, which is readers that come in at around the 3rd or 4th grade level up to about the 8th grade level. And what we've seen, part of this program is we do a diagnostic assessment in these 4 areas to really try to focus on what they really need work in. And what we found is, I think, Megan, Denise, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that every single student that we've ever tested in this has needed vocabulary instruction. Not all of them need alphabetics, not all of them need fluency, not all of them need comprehension, but every one of them needs vocabulary instruction. And so we find this is a common area of weakness among most adult learners, where their knowledge of academic vocabulary is somewhat weak. And so based on that, we have done a lot of work with vocabulary instruction with students, and we found that it really has made an impact on them. So one of the reasons for that, why most adult learners need vocabulary, and why it's so crucial, is that if students don't have a wide vocabulary and a working vocabulary in their minds to be able to use when they're reading, all of the other 3 components of reading that I mentioned suffer. So for instance, these are all distinct components, but they all have there's interplay, and they all impact one another. And so, for example, if you're trying to decode an unknown word in text without alphabetics, you see a word, you don't recognize that word in text, but you might know that word because you may have heard it, you may have encountered it in conversation, stuff like that. So if you have that knowledge of the meaning of the word, when you start trying to decode it, it might click in your head, oh, I do know that word, right? I just wasn't really familiar with what it looked like in text, but I have that word in my brain at least. But if you don't know those words, it makes decoding words much, much more difficult when you don't know the meanings of these words. Fluency is also greatly hindered when you don't know the meanings of words. If you're trying to read fluently, and we're talking about being expressive when you're reading, if you don't even know what the word means, it's really difficult to do that. Finally, with reading comprehension, it's probably obvious, but if you don't know the meanings of the words, like we saw in that sentence that I shared with you earlier, it's going to be very, very difficult to have a good grasp of what the text is all about. And so, oops, let me go back one second there. And so as I said, if we focus on vocabulary instruction, not exclusively, but if we include vocabulary instruction in our regular practice with our students, that is going to help improve all of the components of reading and make them much better readers. Now, one final thing I want to talk about before I pass it over to Denise to start sharing some strategies with you is when we talk about vocabulary, the question is, well, what words should we focus on? Because, of course, there's, seemingly an infinite number of words that we could use in instruction. And we typically want to focus on what we call Tier 2 academic vocabulary. So we divide words into 3 main tiers. Tier number 1 is what we would say are commonly used everyday type of words. So you can see some examples there: house, car, animal, flower. These are words that most people use on a regular basis. Now, I will point out, if you are working with English language learners, there is definitely times where Tier 1 vocabulary will be the focus of your vocabulary instruction, depending on their levels of, their language levels. So we're not saying you should never focus on Tier 1. And in fact, like I said, with English language learners, that might be where you want to start focusing. Tier 2 words are words that are used in various academic contexts. So these words sometimes have multiple meanings. They can be used in different content areas. They might be used in social studies or science or math. And students are going to encounter them a lot in their academic work. So we have words here, the examples: relative, accumulate, increase, navigate, cite, contrast. So these were, like, you think about the word contrast, that has multiple meanings. It could be, it could also be contrast, like a verb to say how things are different. So this is where we typically do a lot of focus of our vocabulary words, because we figure we get the most bang for our buck here, because students are going to encounter these, across the board in most of their academic work. Finally, we have Tier 3 words, which are words that have very specific meanings in very specific contexts. So these are like scientific or mathematical terms. You see here, photosynthesis, aorta, circumference, parabola. Those words typically have one single meaning, and they have one specific use. And of course, when you encounter those, the students need to know what those mean. And so you might need to spend a little time explaining those, but we typically don't do vocabulary activities and strategies with those words. Most of our vocabulary activities and strategies are going to focus on those Tier 2 words, again, because the students are going to encounter those a lot. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, yeah, but how am I going to know what words, are Tier 2 and Tier 3? First of all, there's not an exact science to this. You're going to have to, some of it is just using your discretion and thinking about the word and, how it's going to be used. But there are also a lot of resources, and later on, we will share a link with you with the document that has lists of Tier 2 words. And that will give you a good place to get started if you're going to start doing this with your learners. Now, before we move on to start talking about some of the strategies for introducing and practicing with these words, I would just want to ask, are there any questions regarding any of the stuff that I've been talking about the rationale and the reason why we teach vocabulary? All right, well, I'm going to pass it over to Denise, who's going to talk to us about how to introduce new vocabulary to students.
Good morning, everyone. Typically, when we introduce new vocabulary to students, we want to focus on, you want to question yourself if how many words, new vocabulary words did you introduce to your students? And that typically is between a range of 5 to 10 words for our intermediate level readers. And we think that that's about the best. That also depends on the amount of instructional time, your classroom location, if you're remote or if you are in person, and your knowledge of the students themselves. All of these have an impact on the appropriate number of words you would teach per lesson. As over the last couple of years, as we've gone through COVID, we began to really utilize different types of online resources such as Zoom polling, quizzes, Kahoot, to create online activities that were both engaging and functional. The quizzes website that we're going to share with you today we're going to have you take part in what's called a knowledge rating chart. This is to gauge students' prior knowledge of words and their meanings. The rating chart asks students to rate their knowledge of words from 4, I know this word well enough to teach someone else, to 1, I haven't heard the word before. And after rating themselves, students have the opportunity to type the definition of the words if they know it, okay? So we're gonna ask you to participate in polling here in just a moment, but Jonathan's going to bring up a knowledge rating chart activity that was already created that we've used before in our class. And I want to give you a couple of things about quizzes here. Quizzes is free. You can use it. There's some maximum storage issues that you could face if you have too many things on here. But we were able to get a membership to this, so it is helpful. But you create questions, you can create different types of questions on this website, polling questions, fill in the blank, short response or short answer types of questions. You can also use this website for creating lessons on PowerPoint slides for a presentation if you want as well. So what we do is we introduce typically 5 new words to students at a time. And we this is what they look like. As you'll see, these are the questions. And then if you scroll down just a little bit, Jonathan, we want you to type your word, what you think the word effect means. You're going to type it in the box below. Okay. So in just a moment, Jonathan is going to put in the chat box a link to this quiz, and you're going to actually take part in the quiz. So you're going to, you're seeing Jonathan activate the quiz activity. This will be a live quiz, and you're going to see him copy and paste the link in. Can you make the display bigger, Jonathan?
I can try. So I'm going to put that link in there. Oops.
Yep.
Let me try again. So if you, in the chat, I'm going to put that link. And if, let's see if it works.
Yeah.
Go ahead and click on that. Someone tell me if that works for you.
If
Or
not,
you can just type in joinmyquiz.com and enter the code that you see on the screen.
when you go into join my quiz, yep, Susan, you're going to click on the link, then you're going to type your name in, and we'll give you a few moments to click the start button here. And then you're going to take a live poll, and we're going to rate your knowledge of the words.
And what you're seeing on the screen that I'm sharing right now is what the teacher sees when they start the quiz. And so you can see everyone's names coming up here. And when we get started, I'll stop sharing so that you don't have too many distractions going on there.
Jonathan, also, you can mute the music on here as we start. Music also comes with it, but it's sometimes distracting. Cool. Couple more seconds and then we'll have Jonathan start.
Before we start, is anyone having difficulty accessing this?
Linda, if you unmute, you can ask the question.
Yeah, this is Dottie. I'm just not sure if I'm clicking the pink start button, but nothing is starting. So
Dottie, if you go on the Zoom, if you go to the chat, which should be, I think, in the bottom of your screen somewhere. If you open that up, there's a link that you'll want to click.
Yeah, I did that and I signed in.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
And
Oh, yeah. Okay, so just, okay, you're good to go. So you just have to wait a minute, and when we get
Oh,
started, you'll
okay.
see it. Yep.
I
It's
thought
a,
I missed something.
it's a teacher-led quiz activity. So the teacher starts it when the students are all logged in. So that's what
Oh.
you're waiting for. My mistake.
Oh, no problem.
In fact, I'll stop sharing right now, so that way they can just look at what's on their screen.
Okay. Jonathan, you want to start the quiz then?
Sure. So we're going to go ahead and start. And then on your screen, you should see the quiz starting in just a second here.
You'll see a countdown, and then you'll want to rate your knowledge of the word and then write your answer in if you know the meaning of the word.
And if it's playing music and you don't want to hear it, up at the top of the screen, there's a little like speaker button. If you click that, it will turn the music off. Looks like most people are making pretty good progress here. So maybe we'll take just another minute and then we can kind of show you what it looks like on our side. Oops. So I just pulled up my screen, and if you're finished, you can see from the teacher side, it has a list of all the participants and it shows you their progress. So the ones that say 10, that means they've answered all 10 questions. And down here, we have a couple people who are still working on some. And so you're able to see that. And when it's done, you're able to actually see everyone's responses as well. So this can be a really great tool if you're teaching online for students to be able to, give you this information about what they know about these words. Although I would add that if you're not, you don't have to use this tool to do this. There's many other ways. You could just have them write this on a piece of paper, or just tell you their rating, of course, as well.
Another important thing to know about this is that as you go through, polls and fill in the blanks are marked as correct. you go back through and you as an instructor would, or a volunteer coordinator or tutor would go through and look at the answers and see what the students, how the students have responded. And this can also be used as a post-test as well, to gauge how much students have gained in knowledge of the words after multiple points of contact with them, if that makes sense. We're going to go ahead and were there any questions on this one?
Denise, there was a question I got in the chat.
Yeah.
It says, does it work asynchronously? As in, can you accumulate answers from different students over time?
You can assign this as a homework activity. What I found with this, one of the downsides is that if you assign this as homework, you can only use the activity like one time. So that's the downside. So that's why I do use this as an asynchronous activity at that point.
So what I'm showing here on the screen now is after you've ended it, you can go through all the questions, and if you click this button that says poll, it shows you how many students said each one. And so, you know, depending on how, and there is a way, and I don't think we have time to necessarily go through it, but you can go back to reports and look at each individual student, and it will show you what they answered.
Yep.
But when you're getting started, this gives you a great information about, you know, are the learners you're working with, do they know these words already? You know, if we have a few people who have heard it, but they're not sure what it means, you know, then we know that we definitely need to do some instruction with this word.
This is just a great activity to, again, gauge the students' prior knowledge of words. And then after learning and going through lessons and having multiple contact with each of the words, how well they know it and how comfortable they are coming out of the lessons and activities. So we're going to go ahead and we'll move on to
Actually, Denise, real quick, there's another question in the chat.
Sure.
Asking about using this with students who are using their cell phones.
Yes, this is very good. This is one of the things that we found works really well on phones. It is very phone user friendly and tablet and laptop friendly. You don't have to download an app for it. Good question.
Any other questions about quizzes as a tool before we move on? All right, I'm going to go back there.
Yep. Next thing, when introducing words after the knowledge rating chart is completed, one way to introduce words for students is to have them create or complete what's called a quadrant chart. In the past, this has also been known as like a Frere model. So Jonathan's going to click on that link and he's going to show a word that for typical. So with part of the reading program that we teach, we have a meaning. Are you able to see the PowerPoint presentation? Yeah, you have to click back on your Zoom, Danielle. Yeah.
I'll also put the link to this quadrant chart in the chat. I'm sharing it on my screen right now, but I'll put the link in there if you want to open it up on your own browser as well.
Yep. So we have the meaning of the word. The word typical goes.
Sorry.
It's okay. Goes right in the middle. And then we talk about the meaning of the word. And then we provide examples. One of the things that I've watched Megan do in her class is sometimes she'll provide pictures for students that talk about, they give a visual of the vocabulary words. So I included that as well. And there are opposites of the word. What's really important with this too is that you want to make sure that the students are able to internalize the vocabulary words. So you want to use a classroom example for each word. So if I'm introducing the word typical, I could use the word in a sentence, like it's typical to see student desks, books, and computers in a classroom. It's also important to provide that word and opportunities for the students to connect with the words, like I said. So we also work on creating prompts to ask open-ended questions so that the students can connect with the word. So an example of that would be, what is a typical morning routine for you? Or what does a typical day look like for you? And you could see how that would allow the student to engage that word and make it part of their own. This Frere model, or this quadrant chart that I'm talking about, came as part of a list of 15 graphic organizers that I pulled from. So that quadrant chart is located in those graphic organizers are located in the chat box. So if you want to copy that and use that, you have to make a copy of the chart to make it your own. But these are totally free for you to use. You have to make a copy, and then you can reuse these time and time again. Okay.
Denise, do you mind if I add something real quick?
Sure.
One thing, and I've had the opportunity to work with Denise and her students quite a bit with this vocabulary instruction. And one thing that was great before pre-pandemic, when everyone was still in the classroom, each time Denise would introduce words, she'd write them on these big pieces of paper and post them on the classroom wall. And so when Denise talked about using, like, having the students make it their own and, use their own examples, putting them up on the wall like that, it was kind of like almost like a game to see like who could use these words in our conversations and during class. And so, and anytime someone used them, we'd be like, oh, you used one of the vocabulary words. And so really encouraging the students to, start not only, okay, write down the definition, but really start using that word and connect it with their own personal experience. And students, you'd see their face light up when they would use it correctly, and they get really excited, like, oh, I used one of those new vocabulary words.
To follow up on what Jonathan said, one of the best homework assignments you can ever give students for vocabulary is to go out and listen for the words to be used on the news and TV, in conversations, or try to use the word in conversations with others outside of class. And then it becomes internalized, it becomes yours. So any other questions, anything on the vocabulary quadrant chart or anything of that nature? Okay, I think we'll slide on then.
All right, we're going to pass it over to Megan, who's going to talk to us about one or two instructional strategies beyond just introducing the words.
Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to look at some of those instructional strategies. So once we have introduced words to our students, we want to use them for a week, 2 weeks, maybe even longer. If we introduce new words every class, or if we try to use new words every day, the students don't have enough time to really find those examples and to be able to really get to know the word well. So really, we're looking at these words multiple days. So some of these activities we might do, 1 or 2 each day, and that way we can practice reusing the words for that week-long period or 2 weeks, depending how often your students meet. So we're going to start today with sentence completion. Sentence completion is something that probably most of you have done before. So they are open-ended sentences that provide the learners a chance to complete. So what we would do is we would write down our words and we would have them in the sentence, and the students are going to finish the sentence. You also may have sentence completions that are a little more traditional, where you have a sentence and a word is missing and the student has to fill in that word. So if Jonathan flips over to our Google Google Docs are another great way to do work now during COVID and when you're working with students online. You can see section A here. I have 5 words that we were using this week: circumstance, critical, express, phase, and rely. And then I have for section A, sentence completion, they're just going to put those 5 words into the sentences. So they have to read the sentences using those context clues, trying to decide where the words best fit. Okay, and then the second part of the sentence completion, if you look at section B, we're really looking for students to use their own words to finish a sentence that already has that vocabulary word. So you see that I have some words underlined in the sentences. Those are the same 5 words that we used up above that we would have already introduced using the chart or using the knowledge rating chart, using some slides maybe. And the students are going to complete the sentences. Okay, and then this is an opportunity for discussion. Vocabulary is a great time for discussion in your classroom. So if I'm looking at this exercise and I'm going through it with my students, I'm going to ask them for some examples. So if I have a critical decision, I can ask my students, what is a critical decision that you had to make? Or can you finish the sentence and share? And then we can take 5 or 10 minutes going through this activity and having multiple examples for each one. Okay, can everybody see the screen okay? I can see some chats coming up saying that it's hard to see.
If they want to make the picture bigger also, if they're on dual screen, they can make those of us who are viewing it smaller, and then the screen will be bigger.
And I
Does
also
that make
put the link in
sense?
the chat to it. So if you wanted to click on that link and just look at it on your browser, then you can adjust the size as well.
Jonathan, we don't have access to it. I tried.
I'm sorry, Lisa, could you say that again? I couldn't quite hear you.
Sorry, we don't have access to the Google Doc. When I clicked on the
Oh, is it saying, okay, Megan, is it all right if,
Yeah, you can share with whoever, however you need to share with it. I'm sorry, our work does that automatically.
okay, we'll try that again. I've just put a new link in there, so go ahead and click that. Hopefully it will work now.
Thanks.
No problem. Thanks for letting us know, Lisa. Megan, do you want to go back to the PowerPoint or do you want to stay on this?
Let's go back to the PowerPoint. We'll go to another. Okay. Are there any questions on sentence completion? I think that's one of the ones that most of us have done the most when we're teaching vocab. Okay, I don't hear any questions, so let's go to the next one. The next type of question we can do is a yes, no, and why question. These are going to challenge the students to examine the relationship between 2 words. So we're going to have 2 of those vocabulary words in the prompt. The question does not have any right or wrong answer. So these are really kind of opinion questions. And that's why you're asking the students to not only answer yes or no, but you want them to give a reason why. And it's another time where we can spend a lot of time discussing our answers. You can kind of, debate between students a little bit or give different examples. So in some cases, the answer might be yes, and other cases, the same question, the answer might be no. And really, it's okay to have either answer as long as the student can back it up. So if we go over to our Google Doc. Okay, section D here. I could ask the question, is it appropriate for a doctor to express an opinion about the circumstances of a patient's lifestyle? Okay, obviously I'm not going to be doing this on the first day that I've introduced the words. Okay, this is going to be later on after we've worked with the word for 2 or 3 days. But it's an opinion question, right? I could say, yes, the doctor should be able to express their opinion about a patient who's smoking and has heart disease. Okay, or maybe I should say no, because it's really none of the doctor's business, you know, what your habits are. So those are the types of reasonings we would want students to give. You can give these to students either, on a worksheet, or you can project them up onto a screen. Give them some time to write out those answers, to really kind of define what they think and why. Especially if they're having trouble with the words, if you can give them some time and not ask for an answer immediately, that's best. And that way you're able to get those opinions and help them with writing those opinions down. Okay, so if we were going to do one of these, let's just look at number 3, and let's have you put in the chat box, if you were going to do this with your students, what would some answers be for number 3? Is the beginning phase of a person's career the most critical? Yes, no, why? Excellent. So I have about 5 answers here. I have 1 or 2 that are direct messages. But yes, so if you look, there are some yes answers and some no answers. And everyone gives a reason, right? So we have yes or no, and then oftentimes they follow it with because, and then they give their reason. So in this one, could you say, yes, the beginning phase is critical or most critical, because maybe that's when you're in college, right? You're learning the skills that you need for your future careers. And a lot of you said no, because there are so many people who change careers, and not just jobs, but actual careers throughout their lifetime. And so you can answer it either way. So great. This is a great way to get your students talking. It's a great way to get your students to really use the vocabulary words and think about them and give reasonings. Okay, let's go back to the slideshow, Jonathan.
Megan, can I make one quick comment before we do that?
Yep.
One thing that I really, really like about these strategies too is, like Megan said, if you're using these words, if you're doing one of these strategies each day, you could do this and you have 3 questions and it might take 10 minutes to go through all these and talk about them. And so it's not like you have to spend your entire time you're with your learners doing vocabulary. Spend 10 or 15 minutes a day on this, and it's going to have a huge impact. So it's not, I like how it's just short and sweet. You just every day a little bit of practice with these words.
Okay, one vocabulary activity that doesn't really take a lot of prep work that you can do is the who needs to know this word and why. So what you're going to do is you're going to choose a vocabulary word and ask the learners who needs to know this word and why. And the learners are going to respond with a person or maybe a group of people who need to know the word for maybe a work situation or for their everyday use. And then they'll explain why the person needs to know the word. So it's important to make sure your students are giving reasons, just like in the last activity where we did the yes or no and asked for the why. And then they're able to relate to the word a little bit better. So if we switch back to our Google Doc here, I think it was up above. Okay, and if you need sentence frames, I did put them in here. A lot of our middle level learners start out as former ESL students, so that's why sometimes we'll use the sentence frames here, but they're not necessary. So if you wanted to go through the words and say circumstance, who is somebody who might need to know the word circumstance? An example might be in a detective, right? A detective needs to know the word circumstance because he needs to develop that description of the details of the situation or circumstances around the incident, okay? Whether that's somebody, whatever he's looking at, whether he's looking at a murder or whether he's looking at, you know, a kidnapping or something, okay? Who would need to know something about the word critical? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What type of people would need to know the word critical and why? Or you can unmute if you'd like to talk. Excellent. Yep, I see lots of people putting the medical field here, right? If you're a doctor or a nurse, you need to know what it means to be, if somebody's in critical care or has a critical condition, right? It's a really serious condition that we need to be able to relay to other employees. How about the word express? Express is a little bit harder. We don't have that job we might think of right away. Go ahead and put in the chat, who would need to know the word express? Excellent. We're getting all sorts of different answers here, right? And we're getting different meanings, okay? And this is where those tier 2 words really show some of their different meanings, okay? So some of us are talking about express as in how you express your feelings, right? Like an actor, or maybe teachers who are trying to teach their kids how to express their feelings in an appropriate way, or how to understand others' feelings, especially at like that preschool or kindergarten level. Others are using the word express like, you know, the FedEx or the post office. Okay, so express means you're getting it there faster, right? It's not going to be the regular mail. So this is why this is one of those tier 2 words that has that multiple meanings. And really, when you work with your students, you're going to want to make sure that they're focusing on one meaning of the word. And I didn't give you that meaning today. So that's why we're seeing the different types of meanings here. Excellent. Okay, let's go back to the slideshow. Okay, and our 4th example here, because I'm trying to get through them quickly, is the read and respond. So a lot of times when we are working on vocabulary words, we'll oftentimes look for readings that have that vocabulary word. And that's really tough trying to find readings that have the specific vocabulary word that you want. I know you can look at different websites. You know, we use either ReadWorks or we'll use websites like Newsela or Newsela, as some call it. And there you're able to get readings that are on the different levels of your students. So if you have some higher levels and lower level students, you can get readings on their individual levels, okay? But when we do this, what we're actually going to do is we're going to have a reading and we're going to use the vocabulary words in the questions for the reading. So I'm not really looking to see if the vocabulary words in the reading itself, but I want to see if the students are able to comprehend the reading that's at their level, and then be able to answer the questions that use the vocabulary words we've been looking at. Okay, so if we switch over to our worksheet here, there we go. I have a reading here. It's about the Great Wall of China. Okay, and the Great Wall of China doesn't really have anything in particular to do with about phases and rely or circumstances, but we use those words in the questions. So what I would have my students do, I could either let them work in partner groups or I could let them work on it individually. This would probably be one of the last things that I would do with my students with vocabulary, is this reading comprehension. And then once you're on, sorry, I'm looking at the chat here. So once you do the reading, whether you read it in partners or whether you have them read it to themselves, then I have 3 questions underneath the reading. And I would give the students probably 5 or 10 minutes to answer those 3 questions. And they're going to look at those questions. What were the circumstances that led to the construction of the Great Wall of China? Does China rely on the Great Wall today in the same way it did 2,000 years ago? And last but not least, explain the phases of the Great Wall of China, so that I can see based on their responses. And a lot of times I look for written responses on these because they're more, they're longer responses. You know, if you're explaining the phases, you're going to have, you know, multiple steps here. You know, I would have them write it out so I can check their answers. And that way they can show that they understand the words and they're able to use those words based on the answers to the questions. Okay, and I see we're getting requests to go back to the PowerPoint here. Okay, so those are our 4 different types of activities that we do regularly when we are learning new vocabulary words with our middle level or STAR learners. We're doing those sentence completions. Those might be one of the first activities we do. We're going to do those yes, no, and why. And we're going to do the who needs to know the word and why. Those are a little bit higher level thinking because they're giving reasoning behind them. And then we're going to finish up with those comprehension questions based on a reading. Could be any reading. The reading can relate to what you're talking about the rest of the day with your reading instruction or your social studies or science instruction based on what you're learning at that time, but just reviewing those vocabulary words. Are there any questions with the different strategies we use for learning and reviewing vocabulary words throughout the week?
All right, well, thanks a lot, Megan. And I'm impressed that we were able to get through all 4 of those. I wasn't expecting to get through all of them, so that's great. In the chat, I just put a PDF version of these slides that if you click on it, you should be able to save it to your computer. And so you'll have all of these slides available that if you want to review these different, you know, the instructions for how to use these strategies. And then, of course, the document that we shared with you earlier that Megan was going through with all the different examples of the strategies, you can keep that link and use that kind of as a model if you're, you know, going to utilize some of these with your learners. So in the last few minutes, we just want to talk about some other resources that are available for you to use to, you know, utilize these strategies with your learners. So on that PDF that I just put in the chat, if you save that and you go to this slide, you'll be able to click on all of these links that are on the screen here, and it will take you to where these are at. So that quadrant chart, the first one that Denise shared with you earlier for introducing the vocabulary words, that link is there. The academic word list, the tier 2 vocabulary, which I referred to at the beginning, if you click that link, that will take you to a document that has a list of tons of words that are kind of within that range of the academic vocabulary that you might want to focus on. The next 2 links, which are listed as ALRC vocabulary units and ABSPB vocabulary lessons, those are both organizations that have created multiple lessons similar to what Megan just showed you with all these different activities in there. And they're pre-made and they already have the words in there. They already have, you know, questions and readings and stuff that go along with them. So those are excellent resources for you to use so you don't have to be creating everything that's brand new. And I see a question, will links be available later? Yeah, what I think we can do, and I'll talk to Lynn and Rachel, I'm sure we can post this on the website, or we can email it to everyone so that you can have a copy of this if you're not able to download it right now. One thing I do want to point out, if you use those vocabulary units in lessons, like we said earlier, you're going to open it up and it's going to have 5 or 6 different activities in there. The idea is not that you would use that in a single day, that you would, like Megan and Denise were talking about, use 10 or 15 minutes a day, do one of those activities and do it over a period of a week or 2 weeks or something, so that the learners get an opportunity to use those words multiple times. And at the bottom, we have a link to quizzes, which is one of the online tools that Denise showed you earlier for, kind of an engaging way if you're working with students online. Another one is Kahoot, which is also a similar, it's kind of like a game style thing where you can put questions in there and have students using your device to answer the questions. So again, those links are in that PDF that I shared. We'll also email it to you or put it up on the website so that you can access it later on as well. So we are pretty much right to the end of the time that we allotted for today's webinar. On the screen, I put my, Denise, and Megan's email addresses. If you wanted to jot those down in case you had any questions or are interested in additional resources or anything, you can send us an email and we'll respond to you. But are there any questions right now that anyone has that they would want to share before we log off?
Hi, Jonathan. This is Roberta.
Hi, Roberta.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question about teaching vocabulary from context for English language learners. I've heard that isn't quite as effective as it is for native-born speakers, and I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure, and I'll admit right off the bat that I'm not an expert when it comes to instruction for language learners. I would say that, like I mentioned at the beginning, that if you're working with language learners, you might want to be starting with some of the tier 1 words and not focus so much on those more academic words. But I don't know, Lynn, Denise, or Megan, if either of you want to add anything.
I did want to add, I think all of these strategies will work with ESL learners, but as Jonathan and everyone else was saying, I think you need to do them slowly. Maybe instead of doing 5, do 2. Or based on where the students are, because, and the other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of the resources that have been shared in previous webinars could also be incorporated very nicely in what was shared today. So there's a lot of resources that are available that would also work. You just need to know your students, what works with you and what works with them, and start slowly. And I think no matter what level your student is, you'll have success.
Also, Roberta, I have a couple colleagues who are more experts when it comes to English language learners than I am. So if you'd like, I can reach out to them and try to find some resources for vocabulary instruction that are more specific to language learners, and I could share those.
Roberta, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In our program, we have the STAR program is typically a transition from an English second language class into an ABE level, adult basic education level class. It's not just for ESL learners, but it's targeting those upper third, 4th grade level, all the way up through 8th grade level, reading level ranges for adult basic education, intermediate learners. So Megan has a couple of students in her class that are, we use the CASAS testing as our testing for both ESL and for adult basic education. And her NRS or level 6 students in the ESL program transition into or receive STAR services before they go into like a GED program. Does that make more sense to you?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. That's very helpful.
And like I said, I'll try to find some additional resources and follow up regarding specifically, for language learners. Well, I see it's 10:30 right now, so we don't want to keep anyone. Megan, Denise, Lynn, and I will all hang around for a couple minutes if anyone wants to stick around and ask additional questions. But otherwise, we really appreciate all of you joining our webinar today and your participation. And we hope you all have a great day and a great week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.